Do you think as citizens, as people who care about this country, we should be formulating ideas around another group being the most important in this country besides the business elite? But if you're planning to answer that later, you don't have to answer it now.
What do you mean another group, eh?
Currently, we're controlled by money and
Yes.
business.
Yes.
And should we start looking into the concept, even if it's philosophically,
Yeah.
of could we have another interest group? It could be, okay, I'm not going to give examples.
Oh,
but
I see where you are.
Because it seems to me
Yes.
like business and money are at the cornerstone of everything that runs this country.
Yeah.
And could we have an idea or concept of something else
Yes.
that is not that? Because it seems we'll compromise almost everything
Yeah.
as long as business works.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's not a South African phenomenon,
It's not.
right?
Yeah.
It's essentially the US has been taken over by business elite and business interests, right?
Correct.
So, but I want to just answer your question by going into the next interest group.
Yes.
The next interest group is, let's call it the citizens interest groups, right? Not citizens us, but citizens like average, like general, right?
Same.
Same, right?
It's an E and an A.
What is the interest of the citizens? It's prosperity.
We don't call it citizens elite, just citizens group.
Citizens, they're not an elite because they don't really have got influential power on what happens in government. They can vote, but
I think the reason I'm asking, when we speak business elite, we're not talking all business people.
No, we're not
when
talking.
When we speak governing elite, we're not
it's
talking all
general
politicians.
Interest. No.
So citizens, we're not saying community leaders. We're speaking just ordinary people.
Ordinary people. We will talk about, we can talk about how they are organized. They might be organized into NGOs, other political parties, lobby groups, and all of that. Those are emerging organizations that over time may want to have influence, often for their own interests,
That's
right? And so the citizens are essentially the receivers, what actually ends up playing out between the business elite and the governing elite, right? But they've got voting power. And you ask the question, is there an alternative way that does not hold us captive to money? And a good example of that is China, because what China has been able to do through the Communist Party was to essentially, China runs something called a state capitalism. So the governing group sets the tone for what happens in society, and business has to play to that. And I think what we are probably going to need, we're going to need more organizations that are not funded by the same business elite.
I wanted to ask you, when you said ordinary citizens have voting power, could we include buying power and labor? Or you just want to focus on voting?
Buying power and labor are also done out of necessity for own interest. I think it was Adam Smith who said something like, we don't owe, a thank you to the brewer, the baker, and all of that. They don't wake up early in the morning because they care about us. They wake up because they are looking after their own interests, right?
So their only thing is voting power to you.
Voting power. You cannot quite hold back, like you've got buying power. You are right. There is buying power.
Yeah.
But that buying power will have to be organized, right?
So things like trade unions wouldn't fall under this.
Trade unions are trying to represent labor. So that's why I'm saying you're going to need organizations that capture that.
Oh, but they all fall into this group. So I'm just trying to figure out.
They all fall into
this interest group.
Yes.
Okay.
They all fall into that group. They are ways of trying to organize different groups within the citizens' interest, the citizens group.
Okay.
Right? So you also can go and, to your point, Pen, you can go and say, I want them to use buying power. So I want to choose, I want them to be careful about who they buy from and all of that. And an interest group within citizens can be formed that does that, right? It's just harder because then someone must fund it. We're still not in a position where average South Africans are willing to fund movements.
That's correct.
So, and this is why AfriForum continues to be an interesting use case, because they raise an easy $500 million, a year out of memberships. So
It's unique.
it's unique.
Yeah.
But that's a different story about how they get appeal. So you've got citizens. Citizens can often be helpless here depending on whether they end up being organized. Now, in South Africa, there is not going to be a military takeover of government and all of that, because those type of things require big money, right? But citizens can trigger civil disobedience, just like the July unrest and all of that.
Sure.
All it takes is something to spark that, and then there will be chaos, which is really why the business elite needs the governing elite that has got legitimacy with the citizens, right? So those are the three primary parties. The two other parties are foreign interests, right? Because it's easy to say, this is what's happening between the business and politicians in my country, but actually that often discounts the strong interest of other foreign entities.
I want to emphasize, by foreign interest, it's foreign business interests.
Business interests, foreign governments, all right?
Okay.
US...
Not foreign citizens.
No,
business and governments.
No.
Specifically.
Yes, business and government.
Okay.
US can actually have high influence on what happens in South Africa, even though they are not.
Of which they do.
Yeah. So when there is chaos, when the business elite, when the governing elite is losing legitimacy, the rest of let's call them the funding parties, contest for power, and they grab more power. Right? So you've got the business interest. And the last one is organized crime.
Oh, I said last time that this was my favorite.
Because in the middle of chaos, organized crime also then seek to take more. So you're starting to hear like hijacks of construction sites and all of that, whatever. That's what happens. Construction mafia. A lot of international syndicates and all of that. So what we call politics essentially is this contestation of power between these different groups.